Hello and welcome to The Fault of Horror. I'm Chris, and I just saw Halloween Ends. You might have seen a few years back I did an episode of Worst to First ranking the entire franchise, so today I would like to share that episode with you in its entirety. However, I'll invite you to stick around until the end, where I'll give you my updated thoughts on the franchise and give you my new ranking, including these two newest installments. Enjoy! Hello, welcome to The Real Bit Wars. I'm Chris, and last night I went and saw the new Halloween film. So, on today's episode of Worst to First, what do you say we rank the entire series? Halloween is John Carpenter's 1978 magnum opus and the first successful film of his career. It's credited with inventing the modern slasher genre, launching a franchise as well as countless copycats. Carpenter's piano-driven theme creates a suspenseful atmosphere, and the film is widely considered a must-see for horror fans. So on today's episode, we'll be doing things a little bit differently. Rather than ranking them, I'm going to go through them in chronological order, give a general synopsis of the entire series, and just give you my thoughts, and then at the end I'll reveal where I would personally rank them. And we're going to pair some of them together, so starting off, we'll do part 1 and part 2 from 1978 and 1981. So the first one is very widely considered an iconic film. Like I said earlier, it's credited with inventing the slasher genre as we know it. Although it may not have been the first, it's definitely one of the most noteworthy. Films like the original Friday the 13th were developed directly to cash in off the success of Halloween. Without Friday the 13th, do you have Nightmare on Elm Street? Without those, do you have Child's Play, Hellraiser, any of these other franchises that were launched and made the 80s slasher films such a success? Because of that, you have to credit Carpenter's original from 1978 as groundbreaking. John Carpenter composed the score, and it really lends itself well to this story. The piano-driven themes really drive home the suspense. It's certainly safe to say that it has become just as iconic as the movie itself. I've always felt like the first film kind of carries the second one, picking up right where the original left off, continuing that same story, and it could have really made a nice end to the series. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, but when you put the first two films together, you really have a nice way to begin and end a story. Next, we have the black sheep of the family. In 1982, they released Halloween 3, which did not have Michael Myers in it. The acting is a little awkward and distracting. Although John Carpenter wasn't involved, once again, the soundtrack is phenomenal. Now, I have to admit, the first couple of times I watched this one, I couldn't understand why it was so popular. Obviously, it flopped upon its initial release, but it became like this cult classic, and now you can't call it a cult film anymore. The cat is out of the bag. People are well aware of this, and they love it. It did grow on me, and I do enjoy it now. It's kind of hard to take some of it seriously, but I think it's best enjoyed when you look at it as more so of like a black comedy horror film. It's really neat the way they focus on the holiday of Halloween itself. So yes, once I just kind of let loose and didn't take this film seriously, it is a blast. It's hilarious. There's some really creepy, gross out moments in it. Highly recommended, really cool movie. So after a pretty lengthy delay, Michael Myers made his return in Halloween 4, which was released in 1988, and it was immediately followed by a sequel a year later. Much like you compare part 1 and part 2 together, you can do the same thing with 4 and 5. Jamie Lee Curtis had become a pretty big star at this point, due in large part to her role in Halloween, and she was just kind of too big for these sequels, so she didn't appear in them. They tease like they're going to pass the torch from Michael Myers to his niece Jamie, and it's just kind of abandoned. They don't ever take it anywhere. This movie feels very flat. It takes itself a little too seriously, and what little comedy there is tends to land off the mark. There was actually a writer's strike looming, so the script was rushed in a matter of 11 days, and it shows. The 1978 original is credited with creating the slasher genre, which then became saturated and started to die out right about the time Halloween 4 revived the franchise. In a sense, making this film the genre's last hurrah of the 80s. Halloween 5 takes place exactly 1 year later. Hermit cares for Michael as he recovers from his injuries, which is reminiscent of The Bride of Frankenstein, where the blind man cares for the monster. It's not the worst, but it's not really that interesting. They leave the end open, but it feels a little bit redundant. Definitely not as good as part 4. So this one also introduces the Thorn cult story arc, which continued on in the 6th film, The Curse of Michael Myers, which was released in 1995. So not only will we go over the theatrical version, but we'll also give an overview of the producer's cut, which is kind of an odd thing to begin with. Typically the producer's cut is going to be the theatrical version, and then when you get like a more unedited version, that would be called the director's cut. So it's kind of backwards the way they did it. So the producer's cut leaves more of that Thorn cult storyline intact, and therefore the diehard fans tend to enjoy that one a lot more. And I have to admit, I'm in the minority here, but I prefer the theatrical version. Not because I think it's better, I think they're both really bad, but the only things I enjoy about either version are the kills. The theatrical version left them all intact, and the producer's cut removed the best parts of them. Again, these are not things that save this film from being bad. All I'm saying is they're far more entertaining than anything you get from the producer's cut. It's a little sad that this is Donald Pleasance's last hurrah as Dr. Loomis. It's unfortunate to see such a great actor end his career this way. It's a pointless movie that does little for the series, but I do find it oddly entertaining. So after 3 years, they rebooted the franchise with Halloween H2O, which was released in 1998, and we see Jamie Lee Curtis return as Laurie Strode. It takes place 20 years after the original, hence the title. Janet Leigh, who is Jamie Lee Curtis's mother, has a role in this film. She even drives the same car she did in Psycho. There's a funny scene where Laurie runs from Michael and opens a door only to find a closet, which is an obvious nod to the original film where she hides in the closet. This is a really fun and entertaining movie, but it's odd to see the series that paved the way resort to such cliches. So a couple of years prior, Wes Craven released the film Scream, which actually rejuvenated the slasher genre. It paid homage to films like Halloween, and this one seems like it's aiming to return the favor. Swap out Michael Myers with Ghostface, and you'll have a Scream sequel. It's great to see Laurie and Michael have such a brutal showdown. She leaves him beaten and battered, then runs him over with a car, pinning him to a tree, and decapitates him. So the series is over. Right? Unfortunately not. 4 years later, in 2002, they released Halloween Resurrection. Michael isn't dead because it turns out he swapped clothing with a paramedic at the end of H2O, and Laurie decapitated the wrong person. Michael then kills Laurie a mere 15 minutes in the film. They tried to do something original, but it's one of those movies where everyone is a jerk and it's difficult to sympathize with the characters. So that actually does it for the original series. After this, we got Rob Zombie's reboot from 2007, simply titled Halloween. That was followed with a sequel in 2009. It serves as somewhat of a prequel by showing the childhood of Michael Myers. Rob Zombie has stated that when he was approached to remake Halloween, he didn't understand why anyone would want to remake it, but he took the job to prevent anyone else from messing it up. Zombie was in contact with John Carpenter to seek advice, and Carpenter suggested he make the film his own rather than simply retelling the same story. It has that typical Rob Zombie disturbing atmosphere and excessive violence, which pales in comparison to the suspense of the original. The theme song is used at inappropriate times, making it less effective. The backstory drags the pace down, and it takes too long to get moving, but it's not all bad, and I do really enjoy this one. The sequel, on the other hand, is a bit of a mess. Once again, the story picks up immediately where the previous film left off, before flashing forward 1 year. The plot is focused on the relationship between Laurie and Michael, both of whom are suffering from psychological issues. One thing I do enjoy is the film's really gritty look. The shots of Michael are washed in gray tones, giving them almost a black and white feel. Zombie wanted this movie to be unique, and he accomplished that, but it came at a pretty extreme cost. Are we intended to fear Michael or sympathize with him? So that brings us to last night when I went to see Halloween 2018. How ridiculous is it that this is the third time we have had a film simply titled Halloween? One thing I have to say, although John Carpenter did not direct this, he did return to do the score. Honestly, it might be the best soundtrack in the series. Michael Myers, he has never been more badass than he was in this movie. So it takes a little while to get moving. They spend a great deal of the beginning of the film developing the characters. The deaths are absolutely brutal. I couldn't help but sympathize for every single person that got offed in this film. There are countless nods to the previous films. One thing that was unfortunate, I think they built it up in a way that I just don't think they could have lived up to. It is not the masterpiece it's made out to be, but they made Michael Myers terrifying again. And for that, I definitely appreciate it. But sometimes it's over the top. But at the same time, I laughed and I enjoyed every minute of it. It's kind of one of those things, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. I didn't know that I missed the Halloween franchise. It was really nice to see Michael Myers return to the big screen. So that's like an overall synopsis of the entire series, and you might be wondering where this new one ranks in comparison to the rest of them. And after all, this is worst to first, so we have to do it. There are 12 movies if you count the producer's cut, which we are counting here. And I put it at dead last. At number 11, we have Halloween Resurrection. At number 10, Halloween 2 from 2009. And then number 9, The Curse of Michael Myers. So I should probably defend my decisions here. It's a little controversial not only to have The Curse of Michael Myers ahead of the producer's cut, they are actually separated by a couple of films as well. These bottom 4, I don't like any of them. The only thing I enjoy about anything from The Curse of Michael Myers are the death scenes. And they're not present in the producer's cut. So after that, at number 8, we have Halloween 5. Number 7, Halloween 4. At number 6, we have the 2007 version of Halloween. At number 5, Halloween 3. And then number 4, the 2018 version of Halloween. Number 3, H2O. Number 2, Halloween 2. And number 1, the original. Well, that does it for today's episode of Worst to First. Happy Halloween, everyone, and thank you for watching The Real Bit Wars. Alright, one thing I do need to correct about that video is I speak about Halloween 3 as though John Carpenter had no involvement, but he did in fact work on the soundtrack, so I apologize for that mistake. So let's get to these two newest ones. Halloween Kills from last year and Halloween Ends from this year. Going into Halloween 2018, I had very high expectations and it kind of fell short. But since then, I've rewatched it and I've grown to really love that movie a lot. So I think that might have elevated my expectations a little bit when Halloween Kills came out, and naturally that one also fell short. I've only watched it a couple of times. Once was the theatrical version, and again I watched the extended cut which was released on DVD, and I still don't think it's great. I would probably classify it more so as like the best of the bad ones. The plot is a bit of a clunky mess. At times it's a little bit corny. You know, they're trying to borrow social commentary from like actual events that we've seen in recent years. You might have seen some of the interviews that Jamie Lee Curtis did in regards to this film that were just kind of in poor taste in my opinion. I don't really feel like they needed to go there. It takes a while to get going. It's a little boring at times. It doesn't feel like it makes a whole lot of sense. A lot of people have criticized it for being like a segue film to the third one, and I think that's a fair assessment. They probably could have gotten the point across in 2 films rather than 3. The first time I watched it, I remember staring at the end credits and pondering, like, is this the worst one ever? It wasn't necessarily overtly offensive or anything, but I just thought, wow, that was not good at all. I think I've softened on it a bit. I don't think it's terrible, but I still don't think it's all that great. So I found myself sort of hoping that maybe they could redeem themselves with Halloween Ends. Going straight to the chase here, I think they kind of did, and I know I'm probably in the minority on that. Looking at these new ones as a trilogy, I think the bad one in the middle is sort of bookended by superior films. A lot of people are probably going to hate Halloween Ends. I'm just not one of them. I was a little worried for like the first half of the film. I thought, oh no, they're gonna botch this entirely. But by the time it got to the second half of the movie, I had completely forgotten about the things that I didn't care about earlier on. So I would like to keep this spoiler free for anybody that hasn't seen Halloween Ends yet. Some of the things I was hearing going into it before I watched it was that this was in fact the end. They're like not being subtle about it. Like, this is the end of Michael Myers. And another rumor going around was that how Laurie Strode was going to kill Michael Myers was she was going to take him out with her. Like, they were both going to die at the end. So I don't want to say anything more than that, but that was just what I had heard. I will say that I did enjoy the ending. I thought that was nice and conclusive. There's no doubt they'll probably revisit this series at some point in the future. A thing that's kind of touched on very early on, we don't see Michael Myers until, I want to say it was like roughly 40 minutes into the film, which felt kind of odd. Again, I was starting to get a little concerned that he wasn't there, and when he does make his debut, it's a major plot point, but it was one that did not have me sold immediately. It did have some nice stylistic visuals at points. There are throwbacks to many other films in the series, but all in all, I gotta say, for the two newest installments, I give one a thumbs down, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends, I give a thumbs up. I liked this movie. I think the series went out with a bang. Although Michael Myers didn't get as much screen time in this one as he did in the two previous ones, it made him so cool again. The series was just feeling so tired. Every time they would get it right, they would follow it up by getting it wrong. H2O was good, Resurrection was terrible. Rob Zombie's movie was good, his sequel was bad. But I think this serves as a pretty serviceable trilogy. So for the updated rankings, let's take a look at this. Here is my original ranking from 2018. So looking at the bottom, one of the first things I'm very tempted to do is swap the producer's cut and Resurrection. In large part because I've only seen the producer's cut once, but that feels like one time too many. So I'm gonna leave those as is. And then going up further on the bottom of the list, we have Rob Zombie's sequel, and then the theatrical version of Curse of Michael Myers. Again, I'm gonna leave those as is, but it is kind of tempting to swap them. I gotta say though, much like Halloween Kills, Rob Zombie's sequel is one that I really want to like. I want to enjoy this movie, but every time I try, I just can't because they're not great. It feels natural to put 4 and 5 back to back. But I also think I'm fooling myself by trying to say that 5 is as good as 4. So I think in between those two is where I'm going to insert Halloween Kills. Next up we have Rob Zombie's version. I'm going to leave that right where it is also. And here's where I'm a little bit torn. I have another movie to add, and you might be thinking I'm crazy for putting it this high on the list, but there's a lot of stuff that's not really that good. I have some major issues with Rob Zombie's first movie, even though I love it. I think what I'm going to do is put Halloween Ends after Halloween 3. However, I am going to make one more alteration to the list. Like I said, I've been rewatching 2018 almost every year since it came out. I like this movie. So I'm going to swap it with H2O, and then I'm going to leave the original 2 in their spots at 2 and 1 respectively. So that is my updated worst to first ranking of the Halloween franchise. And if you don't like it, just remember, it's the fault of horror.